Go ahead. All right. Call to order this Planning and Zoning Commission meeting of September 6, 2022. Please all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You would please call the roll.
Mr. Redmond.
Here.
Mr. Kressler.
Here.
Mr. Weisgerber.
Here.
Mr. O'Neill.
Here.
Mr. Bateman.
Here.
All here.
Okay. Next order of business is the review and approval of the meeting minutes from the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting dated August 8th, 2022. Do we have any changes or corrections?
I do.
Okay.
On the last page, packet page 6, fourth paragraph up, there's just some typo corrections. Second line, eliminate the word other. Bottom line, they remove one curb cut, existing curb cut, and that's it. And I'll just give Eva the copy that's marked up. That's all I have.
Anyone else? Do we have a motion to approve them as amended by Kessler?
Since I amended them, so moved.
Second. All right.
Mr. Kressler.
Yes.
Mr. Weisgerber.
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill.
Yes.
Mr. Bateman.
Yes.
Mr. Redmond.
Yes.
5-0. Motion carries.
Okay. Next order of business, open forum. We have one person signed up for open forum, and I guess you're giving a presentation for us? Okay, wonderful. Please, Cindy, please step up and just give us your name and address, please.
Okay, so I'm Cindy Kessler. I live at 273 East Broadway, just up the hill from Eads. But for those of you who don't know me, I founded the Loveland Tree Committee.
I'm having a hard time hearing. Can you adjust the mic a little bit? There you go.
Okay.
Thank you. That's better. Thank you.
Okay. I founded the Loveland Tree Committee in the early 80s and chaired it for about 16 years until kids came along. And now with the kids out of the nest, I'm re-entering community involvement. And that has led me to look at aesthetics within the community. And I personally feel that we are not managing our urban aesthetics optimally. And by default, we're kind of degrading Loveland as both a community to live in and also as a brand. So I have solutions, which I will discuss at the end, but I'm going to basically show you pictures of Loveland Streetscapes and what it could have been had we really had an eye towards aesthetics. So, first off, downtown character. Do we want downtown with trees or without trees? Although statistics repeatedly say that businesses on tree-lined drives in businesses like districts like that do far better than those without trees. And when you think about it, this is Loveland's Wikipedia picture, and that photographer worked really hard to get those leaves at the top of the page above our downtown buildings, and that's because it just makes us look a whole lot better. Now, we do have some trees here in Loveland, but the problem is they're pom-poms on a stick that impede pedestrian traffic. They block the view of businesses. These are lindens, which aren't bad, city trees, but what happened was we topped them. So that forced them to become more bushy at head level, whereas street trees should be tall growing and limbed up so that their canopy is well above the human activity level. We definitely need to have an urban forester on staff who establishes maintenance protocols so that the city does not do things like this. When you look at these brownstones, one in Covington, the one here, which seems like it would be the better real estate investment. And the main difference is the trees. Subdivisions. Do we want subdivisions with trees or without? Do we want to encourage children to play outside and parents to stroll And I know when the reserve at Loveland went in, I came to Eva and I said, why did we not require them to plant street trees? And Eva said, you cannot ask for that which is not in the code. And you're right. Same thing with parking lots. It's interesting. Barren expanses of parking lots actually have a lot of the character of low rent districts. It's demeaning, degrading to the city. And of course, at Kent State, you can see how their parking lot has plenty of trees, and it's just a totally different feel. And who doesn't want to park under trees? Signage and trees. Our McDonald's was built decades ago. And of course, they have the outdated signage common to the era. But in Dayton, Ohio, you can see a newer McDonald's where they're following the newer trend in urban design, which is to have low signs and tall trees. And you can see why. It just has a much friendlier, kind of cozy small town feel. With utility structures, this one is admittedly hidden back behind Loveland Station, but it's a very busy area. It's highly visible. And it would look entirely different if our zoning code had required vegetative screening. Another bit of green infrastructure that really we should use more often is green belts and reforestation. Certainly they improve aesthetics, but they also have other very practical uses. Here what you see is a reforestation that happened in Phillips Park, spring of 2021. 150 volunteers planted 1,400 trees and shrubs. The locations where they planted were chosen strategically, first of all. They were mowed unnecessarily. A lot of them were steep hillsides that Jason would tell you the mowers, you could feel them when you were there. You could feel the mower wanting to tip. It's really a dangerous mower issue. There were sites where there were lots of trees, the picture on the left. Other places where there were poles where there was a lot of tedious mowing, very time consuming. There were other sites where the areas were very boggy, very wet, and the mowers used to get bogged down frequently. So those places got button bushes because they like to have their feet wet. But green belts, reforestation, that actually saves the city a lot of money too, because you have a reduction of man hours spent mowing. You're using less fuel, less wear and tear on equipment. And of course, you're preventing injury from mower rollovers, which has both a humanitarian and a monetary benefit to the city. Greenbelts are really useful in separating incongruous land uses. When I was chairing the tree committee back in the 80s, the owner of the property there on the left, that's the last house in Pheasant Hill subdivision as you're going into the business district closer to 275. They came to us and said, we're the last house of this lovely subdivision, and then there's all this commercial district just booming down here. There's a lot between Penn Station parking lot and my house. Do you think maybe that could become a green belt, a buffer zone? We looked into it and made it happen. And I will say that there are a lot of places, particularly in city parks, where we could create narrow buffer zones that would provide privacy for adjacent property owners. And it's just kind of a good neighborly thing to do, in addition to saving mowing costs. And I must say, if any property begged a buffer zone, it's these two apartment complexes. And as you can see, to the right and left of Loveland Maduro Road, there is plenty of room for green belts to have been planted there. And when you think about how much more pleasant it would be for the renters to look out onto a reforested area rather than busy Loveland Maduro Road, and two, If you were driving up Loveland Madeira Road towards downtown Loveland, and you're coming up through a corridor of greenery, and then you start down the hill towards Kroger, and the city just opens up in front of you, it would really make a much nicer kind of gateway approach to Loveland than the buildings do. The parking garage, I don't care where anybody stands on this issue. My reason for showing it is that even parking garages can look really nice with creative landscaping. Trees and visibility. The Commerce Park was established decades ago, and we planted the wrong species of trees in the median. You know how you have to pull out pretty far before you feel safe driving into the FedEx parking lot. And you would have thought that we would have learned our lesson there, but we did not, because we planted these multi-trunk trees right there in front of Tendertown, whereas the trees really should have been tall-growing trees, like on the left, where you limb them up and have good visibility. And so the only reason that happened was because we didn't have an in-house urban forester reviewing every single plan that comes before P&Z, because they would have looked at this plan and said, oh, you're going to plant street trees there. That's wonderful. There are no wires above, but you're not going to plant that species of tree, and then to make the proper recommendation. Another aesthetic element that could be incorporated into Loveland Streets are BMPs, best management practices, which are water management systems that work with nature rather than fighting it, where conventional rainwater is directed into sewers that go straight into the river. With these biofiltration systems, it slows the water's journey to the river, so it reduces flooding. It also removes contaminants from the water, which reduces water treatment costs. And the bioswales are also a very attractive element within the urban scape. Another issue that we need to manage better is addressing landscaping that fails to thrive or dies. If we have an urban forester on staff, one of their jobs would be to go back through plans and review the landscaping every 4 years and look at the site and see if the trees and shrubs are still maintaining the intent that planning and zoning you approved. And if the plants are not thriving, like the one at the Goodwill Tiger Laundromat, that dead tree has been there forever. The new trees at Tendertown are very thinly leafed out. They are not an asset to the aesthetics of the community at all. So the urban forester would then send out a notice to the property owner that they needed to replace the plants as per the landscape plan that was approved by you. I will say that when nobody is looking, it's amazing how things can degrade rather quickly. We also do need to clean up our own act a little bit, because we plant trees, but we don't water them after we plant them. We don't protect the trunks from mowers and deer. The tree on the left is at the Cox parking lot, and a number of those trees have just been beaten up by the mowers. And it's unnecessary when you do have trunk protectors. But the thing is, we need to give Scott and Jason the means to take care of our trees and shrubs properly. Outdoor lighting is huge because it impacts viewer comfort, community feel, and public safety. So let's start with safety. Basically, glare reduces visibility. So it reduces one's ability to assess a situation at a glance for safety. It also reduces law enforcement's ability to do their job well. And I discussed this with Chief Ray prior to his retirement, and he knew all about glare and public safety. And God love him, he went back and he created the City of Loveland Police Department External Lighting Guidelines. And I actually have a copy of it if you want to see it. But it's only a 2-page document, and it barely scratches the surface of lighting issues, but it is a huge step in the right direction. And I will say it also doesn't have any teeth, but it's a real good step in the right direction. Here you see how glare spilling into the right-of-way is coming from both spotlights and also our downtown streetlights. And when that glare spills into the right-of-way, it's a sharp blast right into drivers' and pedestrians' eyes. It's a phenomenon that the industry calls flashbulb burn. It's a very real temporary blinding, and it's known to be a contributing factor in vehicular pedestrian accidents. But it doesn't have to be that way. For instance, here with streetlights, if you look at the difference between our downtown and the other downtown, it's all a matter of streetlight design. Our streetlights are glaring for all they're worth, the other is not. And not only do lights that do not glare, they enhance public safety, but also look at the sense of calm that you have with the streetscape on the right. It's a totally different community vibe. It's much more friendly. So what's the difference here? It's all in streetlight design. And we actually have here in Loveland both of the streetlights that were just in the last slide. The one on the left is the majority of our streetlights here in Loveland. But we do have 2 good streetlights at the 5-point intersection. And if you look at the chart in the middle, you can see that the street light rated best, it directs the light only on the targeted area. Whereas our other street lights, you can see how they're bad and how they spew light, which is glare, absolutely everywhere. So the buildings behind the streetlight on the left are the condos across from Eats. It's shining into bedroom and living room windows. And on Loveland Madeira Road, it's going into Tano's dining room windows, which is very unpleasant. So how do you evaluate lights? You look at their bug ratings. And as you can see, useful light is in the center, and it is only hitting the targeted area, which is the street and the sidewalk. And when light shines anywhere else, it's unwanted, bothersome light, otherwise known as wasted light. And there are 3 different categories of wasted light. The bug rating, B is for backlight, U is for uplight, G is for glare. So if you're illuminating any of those areas, you are wasting your money and degrading Loveland character in the process. Spotlights have become a major issue for cities all across the country. And that's because they're cheap and easy to install, and they are literally just popping up everywhere. The American Planning Association, recognizing the scope of this problem, has actually dedicated a lot of webinars, seminars, articles, and publications to address this issue. And the thing is, the most commonly sold spotlights just spew their light indiscriminately. And in my examples here, all of them are spewing light into the public right-of-way, which is indeed a safety issue. And it's interesting in reading about urban lighting, they say that this type of very bright light actually creates a feel of a high crime area. And you can see when they're on businesses and residences, it's just a proliferation that's really becoming a problem everywhere. But the thing is, it does not need to be like that, because here you see two different kinds of spotlights. One is on the brown building, and this kind of housing is so common. It is so readily available. But here at 411 West Loveland, they bought a unit that actually has a built-in light shield that directs the light only onto the targeted area. And the nice thing about that is that the light shield actually takes what would be wasted glare and is bouncing it off onto the targeted area. So it's intensifying the light there. And they could actually buy a smaller unit, which would be less costly to run in perpetuity, because it's focusing the light only on the targeted area. I think that it's actually interesting. In our zoning code, it does say that any lights used to illuminate a parking area shall be so arranged as to direct the light away from the adjacent properties and right-of-way. So I think technically the lights at the Brown building are probably in conflict with our existing zoning code, but I think what's happened is the proliferation of these LED spotlights has just caught us totally off guard. They're just popping up everywhere so fast. Vanity lights are in a whole class in and of themselves, and certainly with their gaudy character, communicating sense of pawn shop, it's definitely not a look that we want here in Loveland. Another factor to be considered with lighting is Kelvin, which is the color of light, its warmth factor. And certainly Bishop's Quarter installed the gas lights, which have a very warm Kelvin reading. But if you compare that to the bright white of our street lights to the right, it's harsh. And our street lights are probably about a 4,000 or slightly more Kelvin, which is very off-putting. And as I've always said, there's a reason that interrogation rooms are glaringly bright white. They do not want you to feel comfortable there. My understanding is that street lights should be in the 3,000 to 3,500 Kelvin rating to feel right. So these are two businesses across from Union Savings Bank, and I don't think these property owners gave one thought to Kelvin rating when they bought their porch light bulbs, but the difference is marked, and there they are side by side. So just one thought, I have given this presentation to each of the council members, and it was met with so much support that I have gone on to talk with Corey and Dave about this. And so as I discuss my solutions, we're actually making progress. I see the solution as being two parts. One, it's addressed with personnel, and the second is with legislation. So with personnel, what we need to do is to hire an urban forester. That would be a college-educated individual, and their job would basically be to manage all green infrastructure within the city. And we need to partner them with a city arborist. And we should, that person should come from in-house. Jason Brock has a keen interest in this job, and it would be a pretty easy process for us to certify him as a licensed city arborist. It's an arduous undertaking, but it would only cost the city maybe a couple $100 to put him through that program. So the urban forester would actually establish maintenance protocols, and then Jason, as the arborist, would be responsible for the actual work. So that would mean he would be training city maintenance workers as to how to prune properly, to never top trees, and he would oversee the process, and where appropriate, he would contract out work. Another aspect of personnel is availing city employees and volunteers on committees and commissions of continuing education opportunities as is relevant to your field. And I will say there there's a lot out there, from seminars to webinars, conferences, trade publications, networking events. Yeah, there's a lot. For instance, there are so many developments, even within planning and zoning, that you might want to peruse the offerings that the APA has. That covers many different subjects, and there have been so many new developments within planning and zoning, including addressing the proliferation of spotlights. The other thing that we need to do is to address our legislation, and wholesale code revision is indeed on our horizon, but it's a long way off. And I'm suggesting that we address trees and lighting now, perhaps in the form of an ordinance. And then when we do revise the entire code, we just slide that in. So regarding trees, we would draft a tree ordinance, and that process would ideally be overseen by a new urban forester. And regarding the lighting, I've talked to Dave and Corey about working with Bob Parks, who chairs the Illuminating Engineering Society's Outdoor Environmental Lighting Committee. And the IES is the one who sets lighting standards that are basically the generic standards for cities all over the country. And he also founded the Smart Outdoor Lighting Alliance because he realized that the IES standards, that there was, if you use those standards alone, you're going to get good but just bright wholesale light. But if you want to address community ambiance and character and viewer comfort and even increase public safety, you need strategic lighting. So he formed SOLA to fill the gap between the IES standards and strategic lighting. It just takes it up one more notch. So Dave and Corey have already started the process of talking with him, so that's a very good thing. So the crucial thing with all of this is that we implement these solutions ASAP, because if we fail to do so expeditiously, any new developments will repeat mistakes that will be with us for decades to come. And of course, with the revitalization, we have a lot on our horizon. And McBride Dale Clarion is proposing that we plant low-growing serviceberry trees, that's the picture on the left, between the street and sidewalk along Kroger's frontage. But serviceberry trees in that location are going to grow to become the exact same pom-poms on a stick that are problematic in downtown Loveland. And the thing is, McBride Dale Clarion is only making this ill-informed recommendation because they do not have an urban forester or a landscape architect on staff. So that's another reason why we need an in-house urban forester to protect our interest. So I ask you, what do you want Loveland to look like in 20, 30, 50 years? And if we want this kind of really inviting, friendly aesthetic, yes, we need an in-house forestry department and we need code revision, but it'll really take all of us, each of us working with within our own governmental niche to make real change happen. So I really appreciate your letting me talk more than 4 or 5 minutes. And if you want a synopsis version of this talk, you give me your email and I can email that to you. And I can also email you Chief Ray's lighting recommendations. Do you have any questions?
I made lots of notes, so.
Very impressive. Did you put this whole presentation together?
I did.
Oh, very impressive.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. All right. No one else has signed up for open forum, so we'll move into new business. The first order on new business is case 2022-07. the St. Columbian Community Center site plan review. I am a member of a parishioner of St. Columbian, and I think Rob is also. So I would have a motion that to ask myself and Mr. Weisgerber to be recused for this case.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Weisgerber,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Mr. Bateman,
Yes.
Mr. Redmond,
Yes.
Mr. Kressler.
Yes.
5-0, motion carries.
So give them a second to excuse themselves. And then we'll move into case 2022-07 St. Columbian Community Center site plan review. And I'll hand it over to Corey for a little summary.
Thank you, sir. And I'll be brief. The memo was fairly lengthy because of the code citations in there. For that, I apologize, but I wanted you guys to have that information in front of you as you kind of look at this. And by no means is it exhaustive, but I think the application materials and that should be helpful in this. So this is an application for proposed 15,373 square foot addition. It's a community center, which will include a gymnasium, community rooms, stage and performance area, and other other areas for concessions and restroom facilities. The proposed structure will be connected to the church by virtue of a single entryway vestibule located on the north side of the existing structure. Looking at St. Columbian's campus, they have about 28.9 acres on this parcel and an adjacent 11 acres that are developed sort of athletic fields and in that further out site. So they have a total of 40 acres in the project area when you consider both parcels. This application is limited to a single parcel, the 28.9 acre parcel. Given the success of the parish there, they're seeking to expand the lawful use with this proposed center, which would accommodate growing recreational needs, obviously to serve the parish and the school on campus there. Section 111109 establishes the site plan guidelines and the standards that we look at these through. Basically trying to establish when, who, what, where, when, why, how for that. And in this particular instance, a review, the expansion would be either a 7,400 square foot or 7,000 square foot addition, plus or minus, depending on, and there is a typo, and I apologize, there's two ones in there on that. But, in that, this does trigger site plan review because it is a substantial expansion of that. And when you look at this, there's specific requirements that are to be provided. They have provided those general requirements for the most part, for the Planning and Zoning Commission to review that. It does demonstrate a new access drive connecting the eastern and western parking areas, the relationship of the proposed building to the site, grading, drainage. Stormwater drainage will need to be modified on the site to accommodate the planned structure, and they do propose that the floor elevation of the proposed structure match the finished floor elevation of the existing lower level of the church south of the project area. So looking at this, the proposed project does have it is a single-story building. It does have a rather large clear height because of the recreational use on that. There are some other guidelines in 1109C, which talk about the specific relationship of the site to the property. And there's a lot of things that aren't applicable because this is not a new greenfield project. It's not a residential subdivision, but there's a lot of components that are applicable in that. And, specifically looking at how does this site relate, or how does this project relate to the site? It's clear that the access will be facilitated both through the existing structure and through, if you look at the site plan, there's a sort of some switchback ADA ramps and other modifications. But importantly, the lower level of the existing structure will match the finished floor elevation of the new structure, and we'll discuss why that's important in a few minutes on that. And looking at the buffer yards, there's substantial buffer yards there.
Setbacks, 135 feet of preserved vegetation to the north, existing vegetated buffers of 300 feet to the western property line. They should provide a detailed landscaping plan as part of the permitting process for review and approval, so we can look at the impact of the existing plants if this project is approved. That is something that I would recommend, just so we can see what that's going to look like, the finished product in that. Looking at the setbacks themselves, 335 feet to the north property line, 465 feet to the west property line, and almost 1,000 feet to the eastern property line. Does provide the required ADA access into the site and additional access through the vestibule. There is also an enclosed stairwell, what I will call the eastern side of the structure, that does provide an additional access point. The proposed structure will have a maximum building height of approximately 26 feet to the roof peak. Since it is lower than the existing building, most of the structure will not be visible to the street. I provided sort of the rendering of the proposed improvements there, and then you can see also in the when you see that, and you look at that, how that relates to that. When you're on 48 in the grade of that, you really won't see much of the metal facade. You'll really just see kind of the front entrance of the structure. When you do look at certain sections in 11.1109, 8 through 10 do not appear to be applicable for this project. There does appear to be adequate circulation through the site. No pedestrian improvements were proposed as part of this project. That is something that the commission has looked at on past cases, and most recently even with the renovation of the car wash use, and something that is a objective of the city. So that is something that they should address either through include that as a component of the project. The way I look at it is concrete's never cheaper than the first time you're there. It's always more expensive the more times the trucks show up. So there are some cost savings to that, or if budget is a consideration, it's recommended that they take a phased approach with a definitive install date, if nothing else, to bridge sort of the gap in pedestrian access from the existing terminus across the frontage. You're going to have kids and things people walking. I mean, it's a community center. You're going to have an additional user load on that too. So it certainly makes sense to at least consider that at this time. Looking at the city engineering review, Ms. Klopfenstein did a very thorough review. The contents of her letter are essentially copy-pasted into the report and also included there as an attachment for that. A lot of these items are technical details, infrastructure details, plan details, those kind of things. But there is one item of considerable that is noteworthy in this regard. It's the way that the addition is proposed in relationship to the grading and drainage on the site. So essentially, the whole site drains into the area where the proposed addition is going to be. And if you look at some of those plans that are provided, the close-up detail, the grading detail, you can see that water is going to be directed downward through both the switchbacks and the stairwells there. And it's unclear what measures they're going to take to prevent, that system is going to be designed at a certain capacity, but we all know that snow happens, ice happens, leaves happen, and you could have a significant infiltration event because of that. Ms. Klopfenstein did address that with the design engineer, and they stated that was per owner specification. So that is for the Planning Commission's consideration and review in that. It does also appear that the stormwater will be graded around the back of the building, and there are provisions in the stormwater regulations that address this specifically. You really can't direct the side of the building as a primary means to achieve stormwater drainage in that. So that needs to be reviewed further. Looking at the way the plan's proposed, it's unclear whether these changes can be made sort of on the fly. And it may require the building to be built up or have a modified entrance or something. It may, and if that's adjusted, if the building height's adjusted, then that certainly the finished height would change as well in that, although the structure height itself may or may not be the same height. It just depends on how the designer approaches that. So you could have a structure that maybe has
the same lower finished floor elevation, but is designed in such a manner that the access is achieved from kind of the parking lot as it sits now, with maybe sort of a relief provided with the foundation. In essence, basically building the building in a hole and pushing dirt up to it. So that means the building is going to be taller on the backside significantly, because you would be adding that, that gradation difference in that. So there's some things that really need to be addressed, I think, if we're going to get a good project here. So with that, it kind of belabored that point a little bit. There's several policy options. The Planning and Zoning Commission can approve it as submitted, which would push this through to this final design and permitting process. You could elect to require additional modifications to the plan based on the recommendations of the city engineer. As part of the conditional approval, you could require additional conditions beyond those already noted. You could elect to continue this site plan review application in process to give the applicant some additional time to address specific concerns, or you could, you could elect to deny the proposed application. There's no real fiscal impact from this decision, one way or the other. I mean, it's a project in the city, it's a nonprofit use, but it also has an appreciable benefit to the campus, and they are, a big community member here. So with that, there's a recommendation for conditional approval. And one other thing I will mention, when you look at the site, you look at parking. So if you look at the uses on the site independently, the site appears to have adequate parking when each use is considered independently. But there are certain circumstances where you could have, school and teacher load on that side of the eastern side of the site, and then maybe have, a service, a special worship service, a funeral or a visitation or whatever, and then also have an event potentially at the center, which proves challenging. So looking at that, if you look at it from a parking standpoint, what is the appropriate park load for a 15,000 square foot gymnasium? You have to consider it. That's the primary use here. The stage is sort of it's incorporated in that, but if it's a stage event, you're not going to have the athletic components. So looking at that, if you look at kind of parking load based on the number of players that may be, contestants in a match or whatever, 50 to 60 parks would probably be recommended, and they have ample property to accommodate additional parking on the site. The other thing I'll add with regard to parking, the configuration, and I lived this personally the other day. The configuration of the parking is such that you have the two primary entrances, the western and eastern entrance, and then you have the creek there, and then you have a sort of a rather undefined access to the football fields, which are large generators of traffic as well. And I know that in a prior life, I certainly would not recommend that configuration necessarily without some significant improvements. And so those events can also, adversely impact the parking that is on the property as well. So those are two key considerations for the Planning Commission to look at. So there is a recommendation there for conditional approval. There's several modifications included regarding regulatory agency compliance, addressing all of the city engineers' requirements, develop an adequate drainage plan that either that addresses the infiltration of stormwater issue into the site through modification of the design of the structure, park circulation, grading improvements. Noted that it may increase the building height overall, address the continuation of pedestrian connectivity along the frontage of the property. And I've provided the note in there for 24 months. I feel like 2 years is long enough to plan and budget that, considering that we're at the end of a fiscal year. That gives you a full year to plan and a full year to implement that if an incremental approach were suggested. And finally, calling for a detailed landscaping plan that adequately addresses restoration to the disturbance of the rear of the structure and addresses screening and landscaping along portions of the building that would be clad. It's a pre-engineered building. It's going to be clad with metal. So, there's a need to kind of break that facade up a little bit with some strategic landscaping. You really can't, you can't necessarily avoid it in an institutional situation like this. I mean, a pre-engineered building, the de facto is going to be a steel structure, because of the cost per square foot issues that you get into with a masonry design. So with that, that concludes the report, and feel free or please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you.
I had one for Corey.
Go ahead.
The parking that was put in for the football field, was that in the entrance? Was that permitted or was that just done?
Before my time, it just sort of happened organically, I guess. Just sort of, it's one of those things that just sort of happened.
Okay. I've got notes if anybody wants me to start.
No, go ahead. Al,
Yeah.
please.
Okay. I had 3 points and I have 4 points. Kind of raised by Corey, the 15,000 square foot building, and played around with how you classify it. And the best one I saw in our code was you have one parking space per participant. In other words, if there's 2 teams, 15 players per team, that's 30. You've got coaches, the referee, maybe a scorekeeper. So say 50 would be reasonable. So that would be reasonable spaces. Now, they evidently have told Cindy, don't worry about it. We have enough parking. I need to see some, I want to verify they don't trust, on that issue. The second is on the, and it's a major one for me. I was in the paving business 35, 40 years, and probably 20% of my building was solving water problems that were screwed up from day one. And then I had to come in and, why is this lot breaking up? And Cindy has 25 major, like under utilities, there's 10. She's got issues. I would say 8 of the 10 are major. The other 2, just some minor things, but things such as valves to isolate water outages in the building. There's some issues. Are they going to abandon some lines or not? Looks like they might be running some sewers to lines that show abandoned. Some of the pipes may be too close to the building. Anyway, there's 8 of 10 in the first for grading, 3 of the 4. Major one is Cindy recommends elevating the building against flooding. Hamilton County Code is emergency overland release swale shall be provided, but no flow is able to be present around the building in the event of a flood because the building is their building. It will block that emergency flow. And thereby, and she says, the main church and its basement, or the main church flooding. Calculations submitted, they must be for 10-year, 10% annual, and then another one for 100-year, 1% annual. They only calculated one of those conditions, so that's a major and that could affect the design.
The 10-year.
Yeah. Stormwater management, 4 of the 10. So basically, 63% of her comments are major issues. The other 37% are just, make a change here, make a change there, easily done. So that's a major issue I have. Then, and that kind of gets back to, it sounds like the owner said, oh, we want it at this level.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at all the issues, I think the project's being designed to a budget that's been, okay, we can afford this, let's do it this way, rather than what's the best practice for a building at this site, at this place. And that worries me. The sidewalks along the right of way, I agree. We can just, as long as we get a written plan from them, is to do it. Because, on the microbrewery and the tavern, for them to put in sidewalks, that was a good percentage of their total cost of what they were going to do. To me, sidewalks in this project is a rounding error, basically, a contingency item. It's not great. So I think we need to tie that down. And then the final thing is, when we had the Grail meeting, everybody was just ranting and raving about traffic. And that project was not approved, one of the reasons, until there was a traffic study. And there's been parking added at the football field and this. I just think we need a traffic study on this site to see where they're going and what's up. And it's if we hold the Grail to have a traffic study, this is across the street, similar type. I think maybe we should have a traffic study for this project too. And that's so. I would recommend that we continue the review application until the major answers are determined for these things. Plus, if we would approve it conditionally, Cindy has no more leverage if they get into a fight, So I think we need to give our city engineers some room to negotiate here on some of these items. So I'm sure there will be some negotiation. Principally, the issue I have is with the height of the elevation of the finished floor. When I look at this site existing in future, I'm going, whoa. I mean, I can just see this. So some catch basins not being maintained, and all of a sudden it's just gushing through the building. So that's just my opinion.
I mean, I might. I think as reading through this again, Mr. Kressler, I agree. When you see all of these red flags raised by our city engineer, it causes you to try to understand what she's seeing. I mean, I'm not in any way an expert in site plans, but again, I think stormwater and drainage is an issue. And seeing that one of the conditions is that the applicant shall develop the recommended conditions is develop an adequate drainage plan and address the issue of stormwater infiltration into the proposed structure, which tells me that it's not adequate right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, that goes to your question about does granting that conditionally limit the city engineer's leverage, or does it, I might say, it actually binds it to the approval process? That essentially, when you're right, we could continue this and pinpoint that specifically, or we could say this has been conditionally approved, but we need to see that adequate drainage plan because what we see in front of us raises too many questions. So I think that's sort of like you're kind of doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Just approaching it with a different message.
I've lived these kind of issues for 35 years. Once you get something locked in like this, you just fight it and fight it and fight it and fight it. And this would be a building that would, is it going to have a wood floor, or, tile, whatever. And the power of water is just unbelievable. I mean,
well, you see in the topographic map that it's sitting right in the middle of a crevice that's going all the way down towards like Bears Creek and down into the Loveland Basin. So certainly it has potential to not just impact the building itself, but if done with problems, it could have an impact on just the general east side of Loveland.
I rate it as being in a 14-foot deep hole, and they are adding 10 spaces, but then they're taking away 5. So it's kind of a wash.
Regarding your traffic study, I just want to make a comment about that. I think that the traffic study that the city paid for already included evaluating that intersection, okay. So probably those results would be the same. Would at least be germane to this.
That's not a hard case. I can roll with that. It's this. Just basically, it sounds like the owner says, "Oh, we want it here because it'll be a lot cheaper." Well, that's not exactly maybe best practice. If it was starting cold, fresh, what would you design? And that's, having lived the life experience I have fighting water, it scares me.
So the consensus is that we would like to see the conditions met.
I mean, I would feel a lot better if we had a more resounding opinion from the city engineer rather than one that is more about raising questions.
So continue contingent upon recommendation number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah, based on the revised city engineer's review after all these issues have been discussed or solved or whatever they do.
Well, right now the city engineer has issued her response or her suggestions, and so one of the conditions, if we were to approve conditionally, would be that they would have to address the city engineer's comments.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they would have to comply.
Correct.
So I'm just saying that I think it would be fair to the applicant. I mean, I don't know that we're trying to send the message that we don't want them to add on to their church.
No, I have no problem with that.
I think we should give them some guidance as to why we're conditionally, or not why we would be moving to postpone or continue the application process based upon them addressing item 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Of which her
Packet page 18.
page 18. Okay. Right, and I would agree. And the thing is, if you look at page 15, grading the Hamilton County storm drainage, no or land path is able to present around the building as designed. I mean, basically, they can't meet the Hamilton County storm drainage requirements the way this is designed.
I don't disagree with you. I'm just looking at it from a perspective of knowing how expensive construction has gotten the last 2 years. This building probably has increased 20%.
Mm-hmm.
It may actually go down in 2 years if they were to wait to do the project. You know, so it's kind of probably they're at the point where they finally have the money and they're ready to move forward. You know, they probably are constrained by a budget, and not having the ability to have an ADA connectivity is probably what's driving the floor plan elevation. So if they raise the auditorium and the gymnasium, then they got to build stairs and ramps to connect building to building. That may not be a condition or our concern, but
if they put it at the church floor or close to it, see, then they,
I'm sure there's multiple ways to solve it. They could do underground detention, but again, you know, it's cool.
I'm just saying
Redoing engineering.
This Hamilton County storm drainage is before Corey's time, but were you here, Dave, when we bought those 2 residences? Because they literally, Loveland bought 2 residences, tore them down and completely redid the storm drainage system because of an issue like this, where everything was concentrating and literally flushed through these 2 houses so frequently.
Who's here?
The way we have these rings today, they probably wouldn't make it through construction.
Yeah.
So, you want to make a move?
Yeah, I move that we continue the review and that the items, as practical as possible, be addressed that Cindy has raised, and that the conditions in line of the recommendation of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 be completed, and that go from there once we get some additional information. Which I would add maybe a 6th one, parking requirements. We need some kind of a study on if 2 of the 3 buildings are being used at the same time, different combinations, what the parking load would be. Because otherwise, they would, you know, if they have overflow, it's going to load the streets in a white pillar with overflow parking. Or do they do something with a culvert so that people can park in the football field area, which they cannot do today? So, you know, how
So let's make a motion to continue based upon recommendation packet page 18, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a plan to address the needs for, to prove the need for and address the needs for.
correct. Which can include tying the football parking into this, so that there's a flow between the two. But let's just leave it.
I mean, I think that point would be addressed by number 4 with the pedestrian connectivity.
Yeah. Okay. Basically, they just need more time. To me, this looked awful incomplete. Usually we'll have like a plan. We'll have, well, you need an extra catch basin here. You need to put a catch basin, trash rack here, increase this pipe 3 inches, and that's it.
Maybe they bought the steel before the prices went up.
Yeah. So,
Do you move that?
Hmm?
Do you move that?
yes, I so moved.
Second.
Mr. Bateman?
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Mr. Kressler?
Yes.
3-0, motion carries.
Mark, Rob,
Welcome back. You two get to go to church next weekend and tell them.
Can't wait to hear the conversation.
All right. Next order of business is case 2022-08, the initiation of zoning text amendment for recreational uses. To give us some background on
Sure.
this one.
Yes, so here we have a request, the Planning and Zoning Commission adopt a motion to initiate a zoning text amendment pursuant to Chapter 1111, Section 11, or Chapter 11, it should be Chapter 11-1503, I got it there, of the Planning and Zoning Code. So, and to further adopt a motion to establish a public hearing to consider this zoning text amendment concurrent with Section 11-1505 of the Planning and Zoning Code. So, Chapter 1156, this is the really what we're doing here. Chapter 1156, that's a table of principally permitted uses. That's sort of, no pun intended, that's sort of our Bible. And that wasn't the intent to have the case follow this, but that's how we decide what goes where in the city. And so, with that, when we look at that, the table of permitted uses and looking at the light industrial district in particular, if you recall, City Council adopted a moratorium on recreational uses. We have Commerce Park, one greenfield lot left. We've got some other properties that are sort of transitioning, and that's our primary economic generator for the city. And so we really need to be very introspective and take a very detailed look at what uses we really want, for our future there in that Commerce Park. And, looking at that, we have principal uses, accessory uses, conditional uses, special exceptions. The commercial recreational uses right now were principally permitted uses throughout the city, the BR district, BC district, light industrial district, and they were conditionally permitted in the historic district. And commercial, non-commercial uses were special exception or conditionally permitted uses. So those definitions have been provided. This has been sort of for years. It hasn't been a problem because we had a lot of greenfield sites. But as land in the city becomes scarce and more valuable, we have to examine that relationship. Looking at that, the 180-day moratorium was adopted in July to give the Planning and Zoning Commission time to examine this issue specifically. So when we dove into the code, we looked at the table of permitted uses. We looked at recreational uses in that, and so the code amendment the process is pretty simple. 11-1503 says you can amend the code by virtue of a motion by the Planning and Zoning Commission, motion by council for the Planning Commission recommendation. Amendments follow a very similar process. So we're gonna use the first process described or contemplated in the code. And so once you adopt a motion to initiate the text amendment process, set the public hearing, that amendment, whatever that may be, and there's a draft amendment presented tonight. I'll make a note about one change that sort of the light bulb went off in that, that we would bring forward to that public hearing process. You would gather input, and then ultimately, with the goal of making a motion to forward that, whether you recommend approval or whatnot to City Council, and then they would take that up subsequent to that. So with that, we have to meet out. So if the commission sets a public hearing, We have to meet the requirements. We got to advertise, those kind of things. This amendment is aimed to prevent the proliferation of recreational uses in the light industrial district. Looking at that, they really have an adverse impact on retention, on job retention, job creation, traffic, parking, and other associated impacts. Because a lot of times these facilities retrofit. Where can I play sports at? I can play in a large warehouse. Well, that warehouse wasn't designed to accommodate the parking load associated with a full day of recreational use or whatnot, 100, 200, 300 people, multiple games. And so you end up with these multitude of traffic circulation issues, the whole 9 yards. And we live this in my prior community. I know where I live, we have a use that's very similar to that now. And we were very aggressive in the township with that, required an ample amount of parking before we approve a modification to that, very protective of that. And I think that a lot of places should be forward looking like the city is here and say, we need to address this. The light industrial area is really not the appropriate place. And so with that, looking at what are recreational uses? Well, some are pretty consistent, but then when you look at the code also, target ranges. Target ranges are sort of a recreational use, and they're not job creators. Generally, they're not huge job creators. They usually have they can't have a high traffic demand. And again, you're talking about retrofitting a facility that isn't really designed for that. Additionally, when we looked at the code, there's some other issues in the light industrial district. If the goal is to preserve the light industrial district as our economic generator, warehousing, wholesale warehousing, lot of stuff, not a lot of jobs. Again, something that if it's warehousing in conjunction with a manufacturing use or a medical use or a laboratory, those are great. Those are great things. I think those are things the city should encourage from a land use perspective. Those are things that belong in a commerce park. A warehouse for warehouse sake because it's an empty building and it generates $3 a foot in rent for somebody that doesn't want to work to market the building. I don't know that that's advantageous to the city as a whole, and that's not beneficial to the city as a whole. So when you look at that, one thing I will note, and it sort of escaped me at the time, but I think that if we're going to address wholesale warehousing, we should also address retail warehousing. And if you note in the code, the amendment itself, if you look at the proposed amendment, the wholesale warehousing is suggested to be moved from a permitted use to a conditional use, and there's a caveat added to the table about being permitted as conditional use subject to the requirements of 1111 of this code, provided the warehousing is associated in an integral component with another principally permitted office, research, and these are uses lifted directly from the table. Or other similar uses authorized as principally permitted uses. And so what I would recommend is that in addition to that, and if it suits the planning commission's, if it's to the pleasure, I can make that change to the retail warehousing to also make that strike through and suggest that as a conditional use as well. Additionally, if you look at there's another page there where the use table is sort of broken up into categories. We have struck the commercial recreation target rank. We have struck commercial recreation and the non-commercial recreation as uses totally in the light industrial district, and then also made the target range moved that from a principally permitted use to a conditionally permitted use. So what does that mean? Ultimately, you guys get to look at it. You get to look at the totality of the circumstances. There's a public hearing process in that. There'll be notification on that. And there is, some additional process that you get to weigh those conversions, as I would say, in the context of the structure as a whole, and the relationship to the surrounding properties in that. So with that, let me get through the exhibits here.
I think you also, just for clarity, your commercial recreation, as you've identified in business retail and business corridor, would also move from principal to.
They're grayed out. Yes,
Yeah.
I'm looking at the reference copy here, and so my ink didn't. Yep, there you go.
Read out.
Yes. So for clarification purposes, commercial recreation would then become conditional in those other districts, which we're not saying that the business retail and business corridor is not inappropriate for that, but it's something that
have to come. Warrants an additional look by the Planning and Zoning Commission. So with that, when you advance that, you add that second layer of review in and that scrutiny and sort of that ability for you to make a judgment call on that. That really gives us the ability to really drive these sites in places where they fit best. And that really is the goal here, instead of just haphazard. Adaptive reuse of structures is fantastic. I always encourage that, but it has to be the right kind of adaptive reuse. Just filling a building full of stuff or putting a turf field in an open warehouse, I don't know that that's really what the intent of the light industrial district is. So with that, the recommendation is that you would adopt a motion pursuant to section 11-1503 of the Planning and Zoning Code for the city of Loveland, Ohio, and to further adopt a motion so you would initiate the zoning text amendment and further adopt a motion to establish a public hearing date to consider this amendment, and that would be on October 4th, 22 at or about 7 o'clock p.m.
So is there currently is there a moratorium on any
Commercial.
Is this commercial use right now? Is that
There's a moratorium on commercial and non-commercial recreation
use
Yes. in light industrial.
light industrial? So nothing can happen until
Correct.
this is resolved.
That's not true though.
180 days.
Yeah, but that's not true in the other two zones of BR and BC. Business, retail, and business corridor are not. They don't have a moratorium. Correct.
But we have not, as of yet, placed a moratorium on the retail warehousing in the light industrial district, which could be something that city council would have to take that action, which would allow us to further protect the industrial park while assuring that we get the highest and best uses within what is limited. And I don't want to put you guys in an awkward position, because the way the zoning process works, as Corey explained, is at this point you are really just to set a public hearing. You're not really to discuss the meat of it, because if you're the public hat on, the theory would be it was discussed before we had a public hearing. So what Corey does is he brings it to your table. He tells you why he's bringing it to the table, and then you set a public hearing, and then then you're full blown with the public in place. But we are simply adding on that we may be going to council, in keeping with the moratorium they placed on commercial recreation, all recreation in the LI district, i.e. the Commerce Park, that we may be asking for a similar moratorium to buy us some time for any retail warehousing use, again, to protect the Commerce Park.
And again, one point, it's chapter 1115. Just not, there's a typo. Replicate. That's my fault. So it's 1115.
11-15, chapter 11.
Chapter 1115.
All right, Mr. Kessler.
I can give you a quick background on the target range, why it was SEC and C. At the time, somebody wanted to have a target range in the business corridor along like Kroger area now. And the solicitors, we froze it. And the solicitor's opinion at the time was you have to allow it somewhere in the city. You just can't say no. And that was then. Now may be different. So that's why it was permitted in the light industrial, and the business corridor was a C. Was a C because I think by code they can't be within so many 100 feet of a school, or a daycare center, or there were so many requirements that it basically wasn't going to happen in the business corridor. So the solicitor will need some input from the solicitor on a couple of these, whether we can actually say no completely. Back then, the opinion from that solicitor was we had to allow it inappropriate.
I know, but allowing a use strictly as a conditional use is still permitting it as a use. It's simply giving the planning commission.
We were just trying to steer it to the industrial.
You could say every use from residence to a barber shop to a general retail is all conditional use, and everything that goes on at any place has to go in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission. You are then permitting them. You're just permitting it with an extra step. So with that in mind, Corey will certainly run it by Joe, but we believe you're well protected. And ultimately, any moratorium is done as legislative. The way that it's done by council. But we're just giving you a heads up that we do anticipate taking that to council at their meeting on the 13th.
At the time, our thinking was we really just wanted industrial.
Yeah.
And that's what our thought was back then. Now we're rethinking as it's developed.
Corey.
Yes, and I would note with community non-commercial recreation, those are actually permitted as special exceptions or conditional uses in almost every other district. Even if this change were to go through, it would be almost every other district. They're still either, a special exception or conditional use approval. So there is an outlet for that. There's just that additional step or review process, and that's not uncommon in regulations. So,
What would a data storage facility?
data storage.
Yeah.
Well, if I were going to classify, you're talking about like a server, I would classify that as like a technology use or some kind of. I mean, they're actually employing people. They're employing technicians. It's connected with a service. With
It's very similar to what HCC does
yes.
up on Cottonwood. They have a massive server in there, and they cater to schools who don't want in-house technology. They handle all the technology for them. And if you go into the HCC building on Cottonwood, they have a massive server data room in there, which is sort of the key. But it's ancillary to what their primary use is, which is they provide IT technology for school districts all over the board, all over everywhere.
Right.
That wouldn't fall into the
So like if you had like Cirrus One downtown with Cincinnati Bell, there's a whole host of people that do that. There's an army of people that maintain that stuff.
Yeah.
And then
At high salary.
yes, and then there's also people, ancillary people that work down there that actually like an IT service firm may go in there and work 3 days a week, in support of a client where they may be hosting that data. So that would be a use that would be permissible because it's jobs, it's connected to another service.
And if they're filling that spot,
Yeah.
it's
Right.
quite substantial
Yeah,
business.
it's not boxes of stuff.
Right.
It's not a warehouse. Yeah.
So what about warehouse, like fulfillment centers, where you're not just strictly a warehouse, you're actually having people pick and pull products and things.
Yeah, like
You have a larger, like an Amazon type fulfillment warehouse where
they would have employees there. They're actually taking product in. That's more like a freight distribution. FedEx is a great example. FedEx does that. They get products in. They have people there. They have employees there, and then they ship and sort those. There are local shipping.
Yeah, what would that be under warehousing, or is
No, that would be it's a commercial delivery service.
Okay.
It's their primary job is a shipping service, but they're employing people on site.
Why don't we just define it as fulfillment center? And that would kind of limit somebody that wants to fudge it.
Yes.
So we're probably getting into stuff we shouldn't talk about.
No, right.
Yeah. So the purpose of this is to set the public.
You want a motion?
But one question here. So, sorry,
Yeah, go ahead.
regarding the retail warehousing, are we wanting to include that as
We
part?
would also
Yeah.
want to include that as
Right.
a conditional use. So if you were to set a motion to initiate the text amendment, that motion would also instruct me to make that modification as well, and bring that. And then what we'll do is we'll fill out the application, bring it back to the commission, set the public hearing.
Yeah, because it seems like not including it would leave that out.
Yeah.
Could we also, part of the motion, make that recommend to council to put a moratorium on that as well? Because that's not part of this. Is that my understanding?
It's not part of it's not under a moratorium.
Not right, correct. It's not a moratorium right now.
Question: if chairman would move his operation to the industrial park and hire 50 people, because business one, would that be covered under our current code?
I haven't really discussed the chairman's operation.
No, but I'm just saying that if an engineering firm would move into the industrial park, and take a building, would that be is that covered under code?
What would be?
Because that would be labor. That would be labor intensive.
Yeah, it's office.
Okay. I just want to make sure that if somebody wants to put seems like an engineering firm,
Freaking out.
many employees, high pay,
There's nothing worse than that.
that would work.
Office, yes.
Okay, do we have a motion?
I move we approve case 2022-08, the initiation of the zoning text amendment, and recommend it to City Council. Is that what we need to say?
No, at this point, you're just asking to set up.
That's I asked City Council to initiate.
No.
I'll make the motion for 1115.03 zoning code amendment for a public hearing set October 4th at 7 p.m.
Would you want to instruct me with the change, with the one modification we
Yeah.
discussed?
Yes, please include the modification we discussed.
Second. Sorry. With the modification.
Mr. Kressler,
Yes.
Mr. Weisgerber,
Yes.
Mr. Bateman,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Mr. Redmond.
Yes.
5-0, motion carries.
If you feel so inclined, as a separate motion, you could then simply make a recommendation to City Council in keeping with the action taken for commercial, for recreational uses in the industrial park. We also would recommend a similar action, moratorium type action taken on retail warehousing. That way it's a separate motion.
And wholesale.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I'm sorry, retail and wholesale.
I'll move that we recommend to council that we put a moratorium on retail and wholesale warehousing in the light industrial.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any old business? Nope. Communication from the city? Nothing?
Homerama.
Omarama.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. My wife is there too.